Okay, hello folks. My name is Wes Elkins. I'm the Executive Director of the Newtown Creek Alliance. See people are watching this feed. So thanks for joining. Obviously there's a lot going on in the world, really difficult and uncertain times. And at Newtown Creek Alliance, we've still been working on a lot of our planning projects and a lot of our advocacy work to clean up the creek. But during these difficult sort of quarantine times, we wanted to try to take the opportunity to engage people with the creek. One of our big missions at Newtown Creek Alliance is to reveal Newtown Creek, and we do that a lot through in-person programming, which unfortunately is no longer safe to do at this point. So we're going to be trying our hand. This is our first go at sort of virtual programming. We're going to be discussing some of our programming, some of the background, the history of the creek, and then also showing off some of the areas that folks may not be familiar with or may just want to see from their screen or from their computer. So with that in mind, this is our first go, as I said, so sorry if there's any hiccups. Please, if you have questions or feedback, let us know. So we thought we'd kick it off today at one of the few really great access points to Newtown Creek, and that is the Newtown Creek Nature Walk, which I'm standing at the sort of entrance here. I'll talk a lot about the Nature Walk and its history and its conception as we go through. We'll walk through the majority of the site here, but it's also maybe a fitting first spot or issue to cover during this live programming because it's an open space. And there's not a lot of these on the creek where you can get to the water, and especially in these times as we're looking for places to safely go outdoors in a minimal sense, this can be a positive resource for people to go outside and social distance. Also, the Nature Walk is it's an open space, and it's open every single day of the week. And we want to give a shout out to DEP for maintaining it being open now. It's also not necessarily a well-known spot, so hopefully this video can help showcase some of these, some of the interesting features here. So the first thing, I'm going to flip this around so you're not looking at me the whole time, and we'll check out some of the spots. So the first is the entrance. It's on basically the corner of Page and Provost. So if you see in the distance, that's the Empire State Building. And if you come down to Page and Provost, there's a sidewalk area that's planted, and then the entrance to the Nature Walk is just here behind me with these stainless steel gates. So we have some folks coming in and out here. So sometimes it is difficult to find, and I also find myself, surprised. I know I'm sure a lot of people out there watching now have been to the Nature Walk, but also not necessarily a lot of people who may live in places like Greenpoint or Long Island City or Williamsburg have been here themselves. So we're just going to take a little tour through. As you see here, there's some signs at the entrance, a lot of warning signs. Newtown Creek is a federal Superfund site, and we'll talk more about that as we go inside. But there's also the rules sort of here posted by the DEP. Welcome to the Newtown Creek Nature Walk. As I mentioned, open every day. It's only from dawn to dusk, so if you try to come here early in the morning or late at night, it will be closed. And there's some other rules there as well. So we're going to walk in here and check it out. And I see, thanks for the comments coming in here. It is open to the public, yes indeed. Okay, so the first is this grand staircase that goes up, and there's also a handicap ramp to the right here. And so one of the main things I want to talk about this space is that, as I mentioned before, it is managed by the Department of Environmental Protection. So it's actually not a park. It's not managed by the Parks Department. It's managed by DEP, which is a fairly rare situation in the city, but a pretty unique one. And that means a few things. I'm going to turn around a little bit so you can see my face in the park here. It means a few things. One is that it doesn't necessarily adhere to a lot of the design standards that you might find in New York City parks. And the design was actually done not in a traditional sense. It was designed by an artist, a wonderful man named George Trackus, and he conceived of this whole park idea as a way to engage people with the waterway. And the story, the sort of short story of how the space came to be, is that it was built as part of the upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant, which touches the southern side of the Nature Walk. And so the wastewater treatment plant was originally built in the 1960s and was soon out of compliance with Clean Water Act standards that were enacted in the 1970s. And so there needed to be a major upgrade to this wastewater treatment plant, which treats sewage from about 1 million people every single day. So a huge section of Manhattan, including places like Midtown, Empire State Building, downtown, the Village, Chinatown, all that sewage, as well as a huge chunk of North Brooklyn, places Greenpoint all the way down to areas in Crown Heights, flush their toilets, and even parts of Queens, flush their toilets to the wastewater treatment plant. So it's a massive facility. It's the largest out of 14 treatment plants in New York City. And in the 90s, the city began to do a massive upgrade because essentially it wasn't cleaning the sewage to the standards required by the federal government. So as part of that upgrade, there was a number of amenities that were offered to the community of Greenpoint of having to shoulder the burden of hosting New York City's largest wastewater treatment plant. And part of that is the 1% for Art program. And so that's where George Trakas comes in with this idea for the park. So he essentially conceived of creating a public space as an art project. You'll see here at the entrance there's a little placard. It's a little worn, but you can kind of see it. Newtown Creek, the Nature Walk. Used to say George Trakas here, 2007, and this is like an art plaque. Stone, not sure what it used to say, wood and plants, the sort of medium that he used to create this art space, if you will. So it opened in 2007, so it's been here for about 13 years, and it's a really cool space. So we're going to start walking through. There's a lot of really interesting features. I think the number one thing is that people often hear about Nature Walk, and they are a little surprised when they get here to come to a very heavy industrial area and see the amount of things like concrete, metal, stainless steel. And so I think what George was really trying to convey is what nature kind of means in a hyper-industrial urban setting. And so there's a lot of sort of plays on that. This entrance area, which is really cool, is what's known as the fragrance garden. And so there's a lot of play, as mentioned on the sign, the sort of medium about using plants as part of the art project, if you will. So these plants were specifically pulled in this area to provide some fragrance, some nice aroma, to combat the sort of chlorine smell that you get from the wastewater treatment plant at the entrance. So there's little cool paths here down by the entrance. Not a lot of people go down here, but if you skip the stairs, you can sort of walk down underneath. Perhaps a good place to social distance yourself. And as we walk in, this is one of the main features known as the vessel, the sort of grand entryway. And there's a lot of sort of themes throughout the park. One of them is a theme, a reference to the different time periods, if you will. So there's, as we go down to the further end, you'll see references to the time scale from a geological standpoint. You'll see references to the Native Americans, the Lenape tribes that lived in what we now call New York City, and then also a lot of references to the industrial history of Greenpoint. And that's essentially what this first entryway is it's supposed to represent sorry, I'll flip you around again. Supposed to represent the hull of a ship. And Greenpoint, of course, had very large shipbuilding yards in the 1800s up until about 100 years ago. So this sort of concrete entryway is very cool. It has these portholes you can look through. That's not much of a view, but you can look in and see inside the wastewater treatment plant, like the porthole out of a ship. So a really cool view. Interesting thing to see. Thanks to Daphne for the comment. So we'll walk in here. And yeah, you can go through each one. Very cool, but again, sort of a node to the shipbuilding industry that was here in Greenpoint and really helped create the neighborhood, a lot of the economy that was here, and of course was based on Newtown Creek as a waterway. Another kind of interesting feature is that this vessel sort of frames the Empire State Building in a really interesting way as well. So we'll continue walking through here through the vessel. If you have any other questions, please ask along the way. This is a really cool little feature here. Hello, Henry Sanchez, dialing in. that's kind of like a turret that you would have on a ship, and it's a really cool sort of feature. And I mentioned earlier that Newtown Creek Alliance, we do a lot of public programming, and we often bring lots of school groups, all ages, elementary, middle, high school, college classes, to the Nature Walk. It's a really amazing place to learn about the creek, to experience the space itself, to learn about wastewater treatment. And this is always kind of a fun activity to stand in the middle of this little turret, and there's a really great echo if you look at the wall here. Maybe you guys can pick that up at home. So we're going to walk further down to the creek here. Hello, we have some Nature Walk visitors.
Are you guys going on the
We're live.
live stream?
Yeah. You guys come here often?
This was our first time.
First time. Okay, cool. What'd you think?
It took a pandemic.
Took a pandemic. Okay.
It's yeah, it's pretty industrial.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, I'm with Newtown Creek Alliance. We're doing a live tour for a lot of folks at home. So if you guys can watch it later and find out more about the history of the space and everything else. Cool.
Heck yeah. Cool.
All right. Have a good day. Stay safe. Okay. So Kevin has a question. How long did this phase take to construct? That's a really good question. So we'll talk about this. There's different phases of the Nature Walk. Everything we're going to see today is what's known as Phase 1. As I mentioned, it opened in 2007. I don't believe the construction took that long. That was a little bit before my time, my involvement. I know Kate Zidar is on here. Maybe she has a clear answer. My feeling is the construction probably took 2 to 4 years. But it definitely was complete in September of 2007. We'll see the other phases, or where the other phases are going to be, in just a little bit. So this is the entryway sort of down to the water. To the left is a Spectrum parking lot. This used to be, for those that may remember, when the Nature Walk first opened, this was an aggregates recycling yard, and there were some really cool silos. You can actually see the remnants of one there in the distance. That used to have large piles of stone and dirt and sort of really added to the hyper-industrial feel. The parking lot is, in my opinion, a little less interesting of a view. Nevertheless, we'll walk down. You can see Newtown Creek here. That's Long Island City in the distance. For those that aren't familiar, the Newtown Creek is the border between Queens and Brooklyn and connects out to the East River. So it's a very sort of skinny waterway, and on the other side of us is Queens there. So this is one of the features of that George put into the Nature Walk, and one of my favorite. And what it is are these series of stones, circular stones, and each one has carved into it Lenape words. Oh, here we go. We have a visitor. Hey, pup. And so, it's right here. So each one of these stones, we're doing an Instagram Live tour of the Nature Walk here. Each one of these stones has a Lenape word ingrained on it. You can see some of these Quandus quericus. Some of these are kind of hard to pronounce. And then there's a really cool key here that explains or gives the definition, the translation of each of these words. And so these were the words of the Lenape that lived here for thousands of years before the Europeans arrived, used to refer to places that we still have today. And so you can see down here, stone number 6, Quandus quericus, translates to the stream source, and it's what today we call English Kills. And for those who are familiar, English Kills is the tributary of Newtown Creek at the very head. So it's basically the stream, the source, if you will, of Newtown Creek. So English Kills is back. It's where the Metropolitan Avenue Bridge crosses. It's near neighborhoods of East Williamsburg and Bushwick. And unfortunately, it's a very polluted section of Newtown Creek because it's so far back. So really cool, these little stones. Each one has a word or 2 Lenape words. Definitely worth coming and checking out. There's this nice planted tree here in the middle as well. Now we're getting to the creek. There's an overlook of the waterway. And we're seeing here one of the more interesting design components of the Nature Walk, and that's the steps that go down into the water. And George Trackus was really interested, when he designed this place, of it having the opportunity to engage with the water in a sort of unique way. And so typically at a lot of our waterfront parks and dense areas around the city, we have what we refer to as a bulkhead, which is basically a flat wall like this that separates the water from the land, and we've lost all that sort of natural intertidal shoreline. And so what the steps do is they sort of provide the opportunity for people to get a little bit closer to the water. And there's also an interesting play here where, we know the water's polluted, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so it's this sort of thing of how close, can we get to these polluted environments in a safe sort of fashion. One other interesting element about the steps, too, is that you get to really kind of appreciate that we're in a tidal environment here in New York City. And so we have tides that come in twice a day, a high tide and a low tide. And the difference, depending where you're in the city, is about, anywhere from 4 to 6 feet. On Newtown Creek, it's about 4.5 foot difference. Every 6 hours, the tides are changing, and as such, the water comes and floods in. And without a sort of intertidal space like this, you can't really appreciate that rising, the flooding and the ebbing of the water. So, let's see. We have a question here from Green Pointer. Show the mussels below the bulkhead. So that's a very great point. Unfortunately, because we're at high tide, you can kind of see this black line below the unfortunate graffiti here. That's essentially where the highest tide is. And so the mussels, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands of mussels that are down on these steps, but they are all underwater right now. So they live what we call, again, in the intertidal area, and right now they're submerged, and those mussels are actually doing a really great job of filtering out bacteria and excess nutrients from the water and helping to keep it clean. And it's spring. You can see the water is, fairly clean. Sometimes we get some algae blooms as the water starts to warm up. I see some sort of microplastics here as well. Definitely, I did not appropriate plan this. Coming back when it's low tide does provide a really interesting opportunity. I just recommend as people step down onto these steps, if you come here, just to be very careful, because at low tide, some of them can be very slippery. Other aspects of the steps are, sorry Green Pointer, but next time we'll check out some mussels. Other aspects are these sort of triangular cavities, which are really cool. And so those host these plants. Down below, there used to be more plants there as well, and that you can see some of the triangles. Actually, maybe you guys can see some of these mussels. Let's see if I zoom in. So in this triangular cutout, you can kind of make out the mussels there, as Henry is pointing out, mussels and the wedges. And so those jam-pack in there. And mussels, like oysters, they like to grow on themselves. And so they look for little nooks and crannies where they can do that. So by creating these little nooks and crannies in the steps and the triangles, George actually kind of inadvertently created this really great habitat for the mussels. And, we might do a follow-up episode specifically on things like mussels because there's a lot to talk about. The other aspect of the steps that's definitely worth mentioning. Hey, what's up, Peter? You're on Instagram Live, Peter. All right. Local Greenpoint resident. So one of the really cool things about the steps is that this really explains it very well. As each step is sort of envisioned by George, again, thinking about this whole park as sort of an art piece. Each step was envisioned as a different geological time period. And on each step, again, are etched different names of the life forms, as well as Newtown Creek marine life. Not all of that is here anymore. And when that would have evolved. So it's kind of like a little puzzle to figure this out. But as you go down on the steps, you can see these geological eras. I guess they should be making a new one here for our new geological era that we're in. And then you can see the life forms that evolved, and then also those specific animals that were here. And a lot of these animals we still have on the creek: moon jellyfish, oysters and clams, mussels I mentioned. I'm not sure actually what kind of mussel that is. We no longer have lobsters in New York Harbor because of water temperatures. Other things like striped bass we certainly have here on the creek as well. So a pretty cool pretty cool little section to check out. This sign has been here for 13 years, so it's getting a little wear and tear, but it's a great thing. As you can see, another sign here, no swimming or wading. That was a big concern from the Department of Environmental Protection when they built this, that people would walk down into the water, and obviously we don't want a lot of people exposing themselves to some of the harmful pathogens or chemicals that are here. There's also a sign, a very faded sign here about caution boaters, saying, you should only experienced boaters should be here. Beware of ship traffic. We'll talk more about that. Beware of currents. Wash your hands. Yada yada. This sign was actually installed after the Superfund designation in 2010. And part of the reason was because George intentionally designed this as an access point so that someone could launch a small boat, a kayak or a canoe. Some fitness going on down here on the steps. That's pretty cool. Someone could launch a kayak or canoe here and get out into the harbor. And George himself is an avid boater and was exploring this area by a boat he built himself. And so that was a really important part of it, to make sure that people could actually access the water. So one other really interesting element we talk about on the steps here are these handrails going down. I'm going to try not to touch things in this day and age, but these are designed as H2O molecules, so another very sort of subtle design feature that George put into the park, obviously his interest in water. So let's see, any questions coming in? Beware of Enterococcus, indeed, a very dangerous bacteria that's in the water. We'll talk more about that later. This is a very cool section with 2 willow trees that are planted and a feature we'll go check out here in a second. This is another one here as well. Almost everything in the park was very intentional in the way that George designed it. These were trash cans specifically made for the nature walk and designed to look like old oil drums. Of course, the area around here had heavy oil refining, so really cool trash cans made specifically for the nature walk. And this is probably my favorite feature in the park, and it is a relief that's done on a granite bollard, so essentially what a giant ship would tie up to, and certainly an art piece. And so what this is a relief of the original shape of Newtown Creek and the Brooklyn and Queens waterfronts. And this has really changed dramatically in many, many ways. But this is a really amazing feature because often in New York City, a lot of our shorelines have really changed, sorry for the wind, changed dramatically. We filled in a lot of the original marshes that were here. We dredged out a lot of the waterways to make them deeper, and we built in to even open waters as well. And so with Newtown Creek, that's certainly the case. So we have areas where in the back of the creek, this is what's modern day Maspeth on the Queens side. So I'll try to orientate you a little better. And this is Brooklyn. This is the English Kills, Quandas Quercus tributary we talked about. And you can see there used to be islands. This is what was known as Furman Island, Mussel Island, with a lot of mussels, obviously. And those no longer exist in those forms. This was connected to land. This was dredged out. And you can also see that one of the really cool things about this map is that it has the sort of depth of the creek. And so it used to be very shallow at the head end and allow for flushing of water to come out. But all these tributaries have drastically changed. This tributary is no longer here. This dot represents where we are. This is Whale Creek, which used to go way back into Greenpoint. This tributary no longer exists. This is Dutch Kills on the Queens side that looks very different today. So a really cool thing to come check out. Let's see, Kevin has a question. Historically, what was on the site of the nature walk through the years? Kevin, you're asking some really hard-hitting questions here. I'm not entirely sure. I've looked at a lot of old, there's a great old video of George Trackus walking around this space before the park was built, and it was mostly overgrown. There was a little bit of a parking lot here, as the treatment plant did not originally extend back over this far. So we will see a map in just a second that shows some of the older industries that were right here, but specifically right around here is not entirely clear. Would have been sort of rubble probably at some point, and we'll talk about Whale Creek here. So here's the main channel of the creek. One question I've seen a lot of people ask is about these giant circular concrete structures that are in the water. There's 3 of them here right around the corner. And these are what are known as dolphins, which is just a marine term for a piling field that will protect a structure, or in a lot of cases a bridge. These are really sort of monstrous dolphins. Usually they can just be wood pilings, but these are really massive concrete ones, and they're here because you can see in the distance this is Sims Recycling. They are still actively recycling, even though a lot of the city is shut down. We still have a lot of active industry here that needs to continue, and so they transport all their materials come in, old cars, scrap metal. This is all city residential recycling in the distance. I'll try to zoom in there. That all gets shipped out of Newtown Creek by these barges. So tugboat comes in and we'll move these barges out, and those are really massive structures floating on the water. And so these dolphins are here to protect the shoreline that we're standing on in the event that a tugboat were to come close and could cause a lot of damage to the shore. So they're essentially sacrificial. We call them fenders as well, but that's what they are, known as dolphins. Down below, I'll show a kind of interesting project here. Although it's spring, it doesn't look like much, but working with LaGuardia Community College and a professor there, Professor Sarah Durand, we've installed these boxes of salt marsh grasses. These were the native grasses that would have covered about 1,200 acres around Newtown Creek, and were essentially completely all obliterated, filled in, torn out, contaminated with all the pollution. And so we've been trying to find sort of innovative ways we can bring these grasses back. So you can see at high tide, their roots are submerged. And so like the mussels, they actually provide a function of cleaning up the water. They're able to pull out nutrients. They're also, as plants, able to create oxygen. And this summer, they're really beautiful. So I recommend people come back here in a few months because they're really big and great. And we're trying to find ways to install this on more of these industrial hard-edged shorelines, a sort of small way to improve habitat. We also have these little fendering systems here, and we also did some planting in here as well, filling these in, sort of these little incidental cavities with soil and sand and planting, then with various native species. So let's see what we have here. Coming up, this is the sort of next turn on the nature walk, and we'll walk down here. We've come off the main channel. I'm going to turn you guys around just to let you know I'm still here. So we've come off the main channel of Newtown Creek here in the distance, and we're coming into one of the tributaries. There's 5 tributaries on Newtown Creek, and this one is known as Whale Creek. And the name comes from that there was a refinery here that was processing whale oil back in the mid-1800s before the modern petroleum industry got hold here. And so Ambrose Kingsland, which Kingsland Avenue in Greenpoint is named after, ran a factory here. And so they would actually bring in dead whales from off on the ocean into this area and render them for the fats and create lamp oils and all that stuff. So you can imagine, there's so much really interesting history in terms of the industry that was here, and it's hard to even envision what it was like to see a waterway filled with dead whales. But fortunately, we've progressed in some senses. So we're going to come back real quick and talk about this ship, but before we do, 2 really cool maps here to show, and one is a historic map. This is a really nice little picnic table, and one's historic and is a collection of Sanborn maps, which are fire insurance maps that people can access for free online. Really cool to look at, especially if you want to check out maybe what was on the block you live or work at back in the past. They're very, very accurate. So this is a sort of combination 1887 to 1951 Sanborn maps of what was here. And so you'll see this is Whale Creek. This is the sort of star representing where we are right now. And to Kevin's earlier question, this used to be a shipyard, the James Leary Shipyard, back about 100 years ago or so. Other things, there was, other factories, asphalt. rope and tackle, boat building shed, a lot of lumber yards. You can see some old photos online of the amount of like lumber that also used to come down here and be stored in the waterway. You can also see that Whale Creek right now, it basically ends where my hand is, but it used to go all the way down to Greenpoint Avenue. And of course originally it would have been, you know, more on the other side as well. You can see Standard Oil here on the other side. Henry Place, which eventually became North Henry Street, right there. And then a lot of these streets that are no longer here, which is interesting too. Leyden Street, Walloon Street, Emery Street, Duck Street, that's a pretty interesting one. Brant Street, which is a kind of goose. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. So come check out this map, and then this is a sort of current modern day, and so you can see how this entire area had all these different industries, lumber yards, oil refining, yada yada, and for the most part now is all consumed by the wastewater treatment plant that is over 50 acres. So very, very massive structure. So come check out these maps. Let's see, questions. We should, thank you, Kevin, we should bring the whale that was in McGolrick Park to that part of the nature walk. Yes, perhaps Eric and Evelyn are watching, and they would also appreciate that comment. RIP Duck Street. So a really cool little entrance here, and this is where the nature walk actually becomes a little bit more of an actual nature walk. The entrance is very deceiving to the title, and so you get into this, and there's really interesting plantings here. And one really cool sort of educational component is that all these plantings are accompanied by a sign, and they give, sorry, this is actually not about a plant, I'm just reading it now. This is about the rock itself, and that's included as well. But a lot of these plants, George wanted to really try to inform people about native plants and what they were used for originally, how they can still be used, so that it's not just something green to look at. There's actually a lot of information, and how, again, connects to the indigenous population's indigenous use of this vegetation. So you'll see this as you go through. Again, you know, it's just the first day of April, so things are starting to come in. So there's also a lot of berry bushes and trees around here as well. This is a really cool feature that goes on throughout. These sort of steps down to the water as well. There's also little ladders here. That can be good also if you're transiting the area by a small boat like a canoe or kayak. This could be a good access point, and it's kind of a nice little hangout spot here as well by the water on Whale Creek, which brings us to the main feature in Whale Creek right now, which is the Port Richmond. So everyone see this giant ship. So this is what's known as a sludge boat. It's managed by the DEP, New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And what it is, I'll try to get the whole thing in the shot here, without falling in the water, is that this is part of the wastewater treatment plant. These boats, and there's a lot of these that transit throughout New York Harbor. And if you hang out on the East River, spend a few hours out there, you'll probably see these coming up and down the East River. And so what it does is it transports sludge, sewage sludge, which is the final product of the sewage from the digester eggs that you see in the background. So once our sewage has been separated, the water gets pulled out to be treated. Our clean water from the treatment plant is discharged out to the East River through a pipe that goes basically off of India Street out to the middle of the river. And then once it goes through, the solids go through the digester eggs, and the bacteria is broken down, the pathogens rather are broken down. Then it gets transported, put onto this giant ship, and they say it's the consistency of pea soup. And it smells, although it's not harmful at that point, and it gets taken to another facility up in Randall's Island where it's dewatered. So even though this state-of-the-art treatment plant that takes up about 50 acres of space and costs about $6 billion to build, is very modern and really fantastic in a lot of ways, it doesn't have the final step of the treatment, which is the dewatering. So they have to load all the sewage sludge onto this boat to take it to another facility where it's dewatered. Then they separate out that water, run it through the treatment plant there, and yeah, it's kind of gross. And then they take that final material, which is like a bio cake is what they call it, and it's essentially a very nutrient-rich soil material that gets transported elsewhere. Used to be used as fertilizer on certain kinds of agricultural industries, but what we've heard most recently is that there's no longer a market for it, and it's essentially used as a cap on landfill. So it gets exported to other parts of the country, and once they put trash down on a sanitary landfill, then they'll actually come put this soil, if you will, sewage sludge, on top of that. I don't know, interesting thing. Got a question here. How often is it filled up and moved to Randall's Island, vice versa? Great question. This boat comes in about once a day. Common joke about going number 2 once a day. But it usually comes in here once a day. It takes a few hours for it to fill up. So you can kind of see the black line that runs across it. Once it's totally full, pretty much that entire line is underwater, submerged. And you can see that's about 14 feet of space there. So comes in, it'll empty its bilge a little bit and fill up and head out. And you can see some of the folks working on the boat here as well. These boats are really cool. There's 3 that are of this style that are more like a barge, and what they are their newer versions, and they were built specifically as part of the upgrade of the wastewater treatment plant. Sorry, it's a little windy. And so they cost about $35 million to build. There's 3 of them around the city. They're all named after wastewater treatment plants. So this is the Port Richmond, which is in Staten Island, and they're designed to fit underneath the Pulaski Bridge. So Pulaski Bridge at high tide's about 38 or something feet off the water. So the height of this boat is able to get in. So when it comes in and it goes out, that's twice a day that it doesn't need to open the bridge, which is really great. It's also the dimensions were specifically chosen to make this turn outside of Whale Creek. So kind of cool to think about that they designed a boat specifically for Newtown Creek. And in fact, they designed 3 of them. The poop deck, that's a good one. Okay, Henry has a question. Any risk of virus infection from the creek or from the treatment plant? That's a really good question. Sidebar. So, unclear. There was an email I saw yesterday from folks at Riverkeeper who are looking into this as they are set to begin a lot of their water quality sampling. And, we want to make sure... Sorry, my battery's running a little low here. If someone's going out and sampling the water, that if there are pathogens in the water or raw sewage, as is the case after it rains, and I think we'll probably do a whole nother episode on combined sewer overflow, is that there might not also be coronavirus in the water that's surviving. And basically the summary of the email from Riverkeeper essentially was that there hasn't been enough research to really know. And so it's kind of unproven either way. So certainly a little bit of a scary situation. There's also concern that there could be potentially, as sewage is coming down into the treatment plant from people that have the virus in their body, that virus is going through the treatment plant, potentially untreated out to the East River, or is being aerosolized as part of the treatment process here. Again, these are very hypotheticals. Very much hypotheticals, and so it's very hard to say, but obviously there's a lot of unknowns at this time. And again, just a shout out to DEP for keeping the Nature Walk open, for running our wastewater treatment facilities, of course delivering clean water to the city that is so vital in this time, and of course the crews that are working even on the sludge boat here as well. So we're going to wrap this out in just a second. If anyone has any other questions, please hop in. But what we're going to do is transition. Here's some more really nice planted areas. And so this is essentially the end of phase 1. We talked about this earlier. There are 3 planned phases for the creek. This first one that we saw, which is the biggest, opened in 2007. And what we're going to have when this is done is phase 2, which is a walkway. You can kind of see it in the distance. That will extend over the water in Whale Creek and will actually connect to what's known as Phase 3, which is another on-land section. And this is going to be really fantastic because it's going to help connect one side, where the entrance is Page and Provost, to another side of the wastewater treatment plant on Kingsland Avenue, and will create more of a throughway and also be really valuable in times like this where you want to maybe social distance and take a walk and not be stuck on a dead-end situation. So the completion date was supposed to be beginning of 2021 for Phase 2 and Phase 3. I would say it looks like DEP has made a lot of progress. They started construction not even a year ago, and it's really coming along. We're unclear. They were working, I saw 2 weeks ago, before there was a full shutdown of non-essential construction. So it's unclear if this is still where this is categorized in that. Obviously, we really care about the protection of the workers here and want DEP staff and their contractors to be safe. So we hope that this Phase 2 and Phase 3 can open, but not do so in a safe way. So we look forward to conversations with DEP about that. But that's essentially it. The head of Whale Creek here in the background. Question here from Greenpoint: are both phases expected to open simultaneously? Originally they said Phase 2 would open first, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense because without Phase 3, it's still a dead end. So Phase 2 may open first, but essentially just be a smaller extension out over the waterway. So we hope that Phase 3 can also open around that same time. So we'll keep people posted about that. But that's about it. So without further ado, hope you guys enjoy this. Please let you know what you think about this. We want to do more programming, the same sort of tours we would give to school groups coming out here. We want to focus on more specific issues like Superfund, like sewage overflow, a lot of our planting activity. My colleague Lisa Bloodgood is going to be working on a lot of that in the coming days, so we're going to try to really engage you guys with a lot of the ecology that's coming back to the creek as well. This was a brief sort of overview of the nature walk and the areas around here. So please let us know if there's specific ones. Yes, on the water, we're planning to start doing water quality testing in a few weeks, assuming we can do so in a safe way. So we definitely look forward to doing some from the water as well. Perhaps we can get our historian Mitch Waxman out here. Scuba tour probably won't happen, but that's about it. So just let us know, comments and stuff like that, what you guys thought, and thank you all.